The year is 1917. Outside the modest Wyoming farmhouse, wind moves through the cottonwoods with a sound like distant water carrying the scent of sagebrush and coming snow. Inside, firelight paints the weathered floorboards in shades of amber and gold, throwing shadows that seem to reach backward through the decades. Evangeline Hartwell sits in her father's rocking chair, the one he built with his own hands in 1872. She is 56 now, her red hair more silver than copper, but her eyes remain the color of deep water under ice. Sharp, watchful, missing nothing. Across from her, perched on a three-legged stool that has seen better years, sits her granddaughter Lily. 14 years old, all angles and curiosity, with red hair that catches the firelight like her grandmother's once did. Above the mantelpiece hangs a rifle, Sharp's model 1874.45-70 caliber. The walnut stock bears the marks of careful hands and careful years. Scratched into the brass plate are initials N.H., Nathaniel Hartwell. Flint. Lily's gaze keeps drifting to that rifle, has been drifting to it all evening. Finally she speaks. "Grandma," she says, voice barely above a whisper, "they say you were the best shot in Wyoming territory. Is that true?" Eva's weathered hands pause over the saddle strap she has been mending. She sets down her tools with the deliberation of someone who knows that some questions deserve more than quick answers. She looks at her granddaughter, really looks at her, seeing in those young eyes the same restless fire that burned in her own at that age. "Not the best," Eva says at last, "but the most determined." "What's the difference?" "The difference," Eva replies, standing slowly, joints protesting the movement, "is why you pull the trigger." She walks to the mantel and runs her fingers over the carved initials. "Let me tell you about the day I dug up my father's grave." Lily's eyes widen. Eva settles back into the rocking chair, the wood creaking a rhythm older than memory, and begins. The story starts in September of 1887, 30 years ago. Eva was 26 then, a widow of only 8 months. Her husband Marcus had died the previous winter, his lungs finally surrendering after years of breathing Wyoming cold. He left her with a small ranch outside Redemption Creek, 160 acres of stubborn earth that fought back against every seed planted, and a 7-year-old daughter named Rosalind, though everyone called her Rose. The ranch house stood alone against the vast horizon, a 2-room structure of rough-cut pine with a stone chimney that leaked smoke when the wind shifted. Eva worked that land from first light until her hands cracked and bled. She mended fences that the cattle destroyed. She hauled water from the creek when the well ran dry. She hunted rabbits and prairie dogs to stretch the winter stores through to spring. She did the work of 3 men and never complained, because complaining was a luxury she could not afford. Rose helped as best a 7-year-old could. She gathered eggs from the bad-tempered hens. She churned butter until her small arms trembled. She swept floors and carried firewood, and never once asked why other children had fathers, and she did not. And every night before sleep she asked about her grandfather, the man whose photograph hung beside the door, stern-faced and unsmiling, holding that same Sharp's rifle. "Tell me about Grandpa Flint," Rose would say, snuggled under the quilt her grandmother had sewn from scraps. Eva would tell her the safe stories, how Nathaniel Hartwell could shoot a playing card edge on at 200 yards, how he once tracked a wounded elk for 3 days through a blizzard that killed lesser men, how he taught the cavalry sharpshooters during the war saved lives with his skill. But Eva never told Rose how her grandfather died. Some truths were too heavy for a child's shoulders to carry. In Eva's house there were no guns. She had sold Marcus's old Springfield rifle the week after he died. The money bought seed corn and nails and lamp oil. The only weapon she kept was a rusted skinning knife, and that was for field dressing game, nothing more. Eva had sworn an oath on her wedding day, whispered it to Marcus as they stood before the traveling preacher in a tent that smelled of canvas and hope. "I will never touch another rifle as long as I live." Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 10 years old. By 16 she could hit a silver dollar at 400 yards. In a crosswind could read the land, like some people read books, could track a deer through country where it seemed nothing lived at all. But that same year, on a cold October afternoon, she watched her father die. Shot from ambush by a killer she never saw clearly, only glimpsed. Just the back of a hand bearing a scar shaped like an X. The territorial marshal investigated, found nothing. The case went cold as winter stone. And Eva buried her father in the cemetery on the hill above Redemption Creek, and with him she buried her talent for killing. She chose peace after that. She chose Marcus, a good man who asked nothing of her except her company and her heart. She chose a life where her daughter would never know the weight of a rifle or the terrible certainty of watching a man fall because you willed it so. But peace is a fragile thing in wild country, and wild country has a way of breaking fragile things. September 10th, 1887. Dawned clear and cold. Frost turned the grass to silver. Eva hitched the wagon at first light, checked the axle grease with careful fingers, counted the coins in her leather purse. $23. Enough for winter supplies if she was careful. If she was lucky. She woke Rose and dressed her in the good calico dress, the one with only 2 patches, both hidden by the way the fabric fell. "Are we going to town, Mama?" Rose asked, still rubbing sleep from her eyes with small fists. "We are," Eva said, braiding her daughter's red hair with practiced movements. "And you'll mind your manners, won't you?" "Yes, Mama." The ride to Redemption Creek took 2 hours. The wagon wheels creaked a rhythm that matched the horses' steady walk. Around them the land stretched empty and huge, broken only by the occasional stand of cottonwood marking where water ran beneath the earth. Hawks circled overhead hunting. The first snow of the season waited in the northern clouds, patient as death. Eva's mind wandered, as it often did on these long rides. She thought about Marcus, about the way he used to whistle while fixing the roof, always the same tune, though he claimed not to know its name. She thought about her father, about the last thing he ever said to her. "A gun is just a tool, Eva girl. It's the hand that holds it that matters." She thought about the winter coming and whether the roof would hold and whether Rose's boots would last another season and what she would do if they did not. She did not think about violence. Violence was a door she had closed and locked 10 years ago. Redemption Creek was not much of a town, a main street of packed dirt that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it did not. A general store that sold everything from flour to coffin nails. A saloon called the Silver Dollar, where men went to forget their troubles and usually found more. A church that doubled as a schoolhouse 6 days a week. A blacksmith. A livery stable. And the bank, a brick building that stood 2 stories tall, the only structure in town that could survive a fire. Eva pulled the wagon to a stop outside the general store. Rose hopped down her small hand, finding her mother's larger one without being told. Together they walked inside the bell above the door, jingling with false cheer. The store smelled of coffee and tobacco, and the particular mustiness of dry goods kept too long in wooden bins. Eva moved through the narrow aisles with the efficiency of someone who has counted every penny twice. Flour, salt, sugar, coffee, lamp oil, a spool of thread. She counted every item, calculated every cost, left nothing to chance. Rose pressed her nose against the glass jar of peppermint sticks, her breath fogging the surface. Eva saw her and allowed herself a small smile. "1," she said. "Just 1." Rose's face transformed bright as Christmas morning. They were at the counter, Eva counting out coins into the storekeeper's weathered palm one by one, when the sound reached them. Hoofbeats. Fast hoofbeats. Too many of them. Coming hard down the main street. Through the store's dusty window Eva saw them. 14 riders moving in formation like cavalry, faces hidden behind bandanas, rifles and pistols drawn and ready. They pulled up in front of the bank with military precision, horses dancing, dust rising. "Everyone stay calm," the storekeeper whispered, his face gone the color of old paper. "Don't do nothing foolish. Don't draw their attention." But Eva was already moving. She grabbed Rose and pulled her down behind the counter. "Get under there," she hissed. "Don't make a sound, no matter what you hear." Rose's eyes were huge, but she was her mother's daughter. She clutched her peppermint stick tight and did not cry. Good girl. Through the gaps in the wooden counter, Eva watched. The riders dismounted with practiced ease. Their leader was a tall man, well-built, wearing a long duster coat and a black hat pulled low. He moved with the confidence of someone who has given orders and had them obeyed for so long he no longer questions whether they will be. 6 men went into the bank. The others spread out along the street, covering angles, watching windows, turning Redemption Creek into a killing ground. For a moment everything was silent, the kind of silence that comes before storms. Then came the sound of breaking glass, shouting. A woman's scream, high and afraid. The explosion of gunfire inside the bank, muffled by brick walls but unmistakable. Sheriff Augustus McAllister came running from his office, a revolver in his weathered hand. Gus was 62, a former U.S. Marshal who had served with Eva's father in the territorial days. He was tough as whipcord and mean as a rattler when circumstances required it. He did not hesitate. "Drop your weapons," Gus shouted, his voice carrying clear across the street. "By authority of the Wyoming Territory, I order you to stand down." The leader of the gang turned slowly, almost lazily. Even with his bandana covering his face, Eva could see his eyes. They were cold, dead. The eyes of a man who had killed before and would kill again and sleep well afterward. He raised a Remington .44 and fired twice without a word. The first shot took Gus in the belly. The second hit his shoulder, spinning him around. The old sheriff went down, hard blood spreading across his shirt like spilled ink on paper. Eva clapped a hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. Rose whimpered. Eva pulled her closer, one arm tight around her daughter's small shoulders. The gang worked with brutal efficiency. They hauled canvas bags from the bank heavy with coin and paper money. $90,000, Eva would learn later. The combined deposits of every rancher and shopkeeper within 50 miles, money saved for winter, for seed, for survival, for the future that people in wild country always hoped would be better than the past. But money was not enough for these men. The leader grabbed 4 people from inside the bank and dragged them out into the street like livestock. The banker, a man named Whitmore. His wife, clutching a shawl around her shoulders with shaking hands, a boy of 9 or 10, someone's son. And then, with a casualness that made Eva's blood freeze, one of the gang members reached down and grabbed Rose. "No." Eva's heart stopped. She had been watching through the counter, transfixed by the violence unfolding in the street, and she had not been watching her daughter. Rose had crawled out, maybe to see better, maybe because she was 7 and scared and not thinking clearly. One of the gang members spotted her red hair and grabbed her by the arm, lifting her off her feet as easily as a man lifts a doll. Eva moved without thinking. She exploded from behind the counter and ran into the street, into the open, into the guns. "Let her go!" she screamed. "Take me instead. She's just a child." The leader turned. He looked at Eva, really looked at her, his head tilting slightly like a dog hearing a familiar sound. Then he pulled down his bandana, revealing a face marked by a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw. And on the back of his right hand, clearly visible as he held the reins, was another scar. This one shaped like an X. Eva's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She knew that scar. She had seen it once before, 10 years ago, in the worst moment of her life. The moment before her father died. "Well, well," the man said, his voice rough as gravel on glass. "I know that face." He stepped closer, studying Eva like a specimen under glass. "Those green eyes. That red hair. You're Flint Hartwell's daughter, aren't you?" Eva could not speak. Her throat had closed. She stared at the X-shaped scar and felt the years collapse like a house of cards. 16 again. Her father's blood warm on her hands. The killer riding away. "How do you know my father?" she whispered. The man smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. No warmth in it. No humanity. "I remember those eyes. 10 years ago. You were just a girl then." He leaned in close enough that she could smell tobacco and leather and something else underneath. Something rotten. "I've thought about you sometimes. Wondered if you'd grown up pretty." He mounted his horse in one smooth motion, still holding Rose by her dress collar. The little girl struggled, tears streaming down her face, but he held her tight as a vice. The other hostages were likewise secured, bound to saddles, mouths gagged with dirty cloth. The man looked down at Eva one last time. "Tell the law we're heading northwest. Tell them if they follow, the hostages die, every single one." He paused, and his smile widened. "And tell them Silas Crow doesn't leave witnesses." Silas Crow. The name burned itself into Eva's memory like a brand. Then they were gone, 14 riders vanishing into the distance, taking Rose with them, taking everything that mattered, taking Eva's entire world. Eva stood in the middle of the street, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. Around her, the town emerged from hiding like prairie dogs after a hawk passes. Women wept. Men cursed uselessly. Someone ran for the doctor, shouting. Eva walked to where Gus lay bleeding in the dirt. The old sheriff's face was gray, his breathing shallow and wet. She knelt beside him and took his hand. It was still warm. "Gus," she said, "stay with me. Don't you dare leave." His eyes focused on her with effort. "Ava girl," he wheezed. Blood bubbled at the corners of his mouth. "I'm sorry. Couldn't stop them. Too old. Too slow." "Where's the marshal?" A deputy appeared, a young man barely old enough to shave his badge still shiny. 3 days away, ma'am. He won't make it back in time, even if we sent a rider now." "Then I'll go," Eva said. The words came out calm, certain though inside she was screaming loud enough to shatter glass. The deputy actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "You, ma'am, with all respect, you're a widow, a farmer. Those are professional killers, 15 of them." Eva looked at him with eyes that could cut through steel. "I'm Flint Hartwell's daughter." The laughter died like a candle in the wind. Doc Whitmore, the banker's brother and the town physician, came running with his bag. He knelt beside Gus and began cutting away the bloody shirt with practiced efficiency. "Get him inside," he ordered. "Now, quick as you can." They carried Gus to his office and laid him on the narrow cot he usually reserved for drunk cowboys sleeping off Saturday night. Doc worked in silence, his hands steady despite the blood. He dug out the bullet in the shoulder with forceps, the lead dropping into a tin pan with a sound like a closing door. But the belly wound was worse. No exit. The bullet was still in there, somewhere vital, somewhere that mattered. "Will he live?" Eva asked. "Maybe," Doc said without looking up. "If infection doesn't set in. If the bullet didn't puncture his bowel. If he's lucky." He glanced at Eva, then his eyes tired behind wire spectacles. "Your daughter was one of the hostages." "I know." "Then you know we don't have time to wait for the marshal." "I know that too." Gus's hand shot out and grabbed Eva's wrist with surprising strength. "Eva," he rasped, "listen to me. Your father's sharps. I didn't bury it." Eva stared. The room tilted. "What?" "Flint knew. Knew someone might come for you someday. Knew you might need it." Gus coughed and blood flecked his lips. "Told me to hide the rifle in a false bottom coffin if you ever needed it. Go to the grave. Dig it up. I swore I'd never touch a gun again. Your daughter needs you to break that oath." Gus's grip tightened. "And so does this town." Ava's hand went to her throat. She could not breathe, could not think. The room spun around her like a wheel. Doc put a hand on her shoulder. "Mrs. Hartwell, there's no shame in fear. But there is shame in doing nothing when you have the power to act." Eva closed her eyes. She saw Rose's face, those trusting eyes the color of spring grass. She saw the X-shaped scar on Silas Crow's hand. She saw her father falling from his horse blood spreading across the Wyoming dust. She saw Marcus on his deathbed making her promise to keep Rose safe always, no matter what. She opened her eyes. "Where's the graveyard?" she asked. That night, under a moon 3/4 full and bright enough to read by Eva, stood in the cemetery on the hill above town. Beside her stood Tobias Mercer, called Toby, a 17-year-old deputy with more courage than sense, and eyes that had not yet seen enough of the world to understand what they were about to do. He held 2 shovels, their blades catching the moonlight. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you sure about this?" Eva looked at the headstone. Simple granite already weathered by 10 Wyoming winters. The letters carved deep: Nathaniel Flint Hartwell, 1821 to 1877, beloved father. Beneath it lay the man who taught her everything that mattered, the man who died because someone wanted him dead and had the skill to make it happen. "I'm sure," she said. They dug. The earth was hard, reluctant to give up its secrets. The first foot was just soil. The second foot was harder, packed tight by years of rain and snow and the weight of time itself. Eva's hands blistered. Her back screamed protest. But she did not stop. She drove the shovel deep and felt the rhythm her father once taught her, the same rhythm he used to split firewood, to shoe a horse, to do any hard thing that needed doing. One stroke at a time, one breath at a time, 1 foot closer to what you need. The shovel struck wood with a hollow thunk. Eva's heart hammered against her ribs. They cleared the dirt from the top of the coffin, and Eva saw the simple pine box her father had been laid to rest in. No fancy hardware. No unnecessary expense. Just good wood, well joined. She knelt in the grave and ran her fingers over the surface, feeling the grain. "Pa," she whispered. "Forgive me for this." They pried open the lid with the shovel blades, the old nails shrieking protest. Inside, bones and rotted cloth were all that remained of Nathaniel Hartwell. The sight should have horrified her, should have turned her stomach. Instead, Eva felt a strange calm settle over her shoulders like a cloak. Death was just death. Her father was not here in this box. He was in her memory, in her hands, in the skills he had given her before the world took him away. She felt along the bottom of the coffin and found the seam hidden beneath where her father's body had lain. Her fingers traced the edge until they found the hidden catch. With a soft click that sounded loud in the graveyard silence, the false bottom opened. Inside lay the Sharps rifle wrapped in oiled canvas that had kept the moisture at bay. Beside it, a leather pouch containing 60 rounds of ammunition, each one carefully loaded and preserved, and a letter sealed with red wax addressed in her father's careful hand, for Evangeline. Eva lifted the rifle. Even wrapped it was heavy. Familiar. She unwrapped the canvas slowly, reverently, like unwrapping something holy. The Sharps emerged, its blued steel unmarred by time, the walnut stock gleaming in the moonlight. Her father had maintained this weapon until the day he died, and Gus had kept faith with it every year since. She broke the seal on the letter and read by moonlight her father's words reaching across 10 years of silence. "Eva," it said, "if you're reading this, you need this rifle more than I do. Remember what I taught you. Shooting is patience, breathing, knowing your heart. I taught you to shoot straight. Life taught you to shoot true. The difference matters. Trust yourself, Eva girl. You're stronger than you know." "Pa." Eva clutched the letter to her chest. Tears came then hot and fast, the first she had allowed herself since Rose was taken. She wept for her father, stolen from her by a coward's bullet. She wept for her husband, taken by disease when good men should live long lives. She wept for the peace she had built so carefully and was about to destroy with her own hands. And she wept for what she was about to become. Toby waited in respectful silence, his young face serious in the moonlight. When Eva's tears were spent, she stood, rifle in hand. They filled the grave back in, mounding the dirt, carefully replacing the headstone exactly where it had been. By the time they finished, false dawn was painting the eastern sky pale gray, the color of hope or ash. Eva shouldered the Sharps. The weight settled across her back like an old coat she had forgotten she owned. Perfectly fitted, perfectly balanced, perfectly familiar. "Mrs. Hartwell," Toby said. "What now?" "Now." Eva said, "We get my daughter back." They rode out at first light. Eva on her mare, a steady gray named Patience, who had carried her through 6 Wyoming winters. Toby on a young gelding that still had fire in its blood. Doc Whitmore followed in a wagon bringing medical supplies and a shotgun he claimed not to know how to use but carried anyway just in case. 3 people against 14 killers. The mathematics were terrible. Eva did not care about mathematics. She checked the Sharps one final time, running her hands over the familiar contours. 60 rounds total, 40 in the pouch strapped to her belt, 20 more in her saddlebag for reserve for emergencies for when everything else had failed. Enough. It would have to be enough. She thought about Rose, about whether her daughter was cold, whether she was crying, whether she was being brave the way Eva had taught her to be brave. She thought about Silas Crow and that X-shaped scar and the question that had haunted her for 10 years like a ghost that would not rest. Why? Why had her father been murdered? What had he done to deserve an ambush, a coward's bullet, a grave on a hill? The trail led northwest, just as Crow had said. Eva read the signs her father had taught her to read when she was barely tall enough to see over a horse's back. 14 horses, heavy laden with men and money and stolen lives. They were not trying to hide their tracks. Arrogant, confident. They did not believe anyone would follow, and if someone did, they did not believe it would matter. They were wrong about both. As the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning cold, Eva felt something shift inside her. The widow fell away like a snake's skin. The farmer fell away like last year's leaves. What remained was something older, something sharper. Flint Hartwell's daughter. And she was going to war. Toby rode up beside her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice careful. "You ready for this?" Eva looked at him. Her eyes had gone the color of deep water under winter ice. Hard, cold, certain. "No," she said, "but I'm doing it anyway." And they rode on into the wilderness, following the trail of the men who had taken everything into country that had no mercy and gave no second chances. The land rose as they traveled sage-covered hills giving way to broken rock and stands of pine that smelled sharp and clean. They stopped at noon beside a spring that bubbled cold and clear from between two boulders worn smooth by ancient water. The horses drank. The people drank. They did not speak much. Eva studied the tracks around the spring with eyes that missed nothing. 14 horses had stopped here maybe 8 hours ago. She could see where the men had dismounted, their boot prints pressed into the soft earth. She could see where they had filled canteens, where they had pissed against the trees, where they had stood and smoked and talked and laughed, not worried, not afraid, not expecting pursuit. One set of prints was smaller, child-sized, rose. Eva knelt and touched the print with her fingertips as gently as if it were something alive. Her daughter had stood here not long ago. Had she been cold? Had she been brave? Eva sent a silent prayer to whatever God might be listening. Keep her strong. Keep her safe. Let me get there in time. "Mrs. Hartwell," Toby said. He was pointing north toward where the land narrowed between two high rock walls. "That's Widow's Pass up ahead." Eva knew it. Everyone in the territory knew it. A natural choke point maybe 30 yards wide at its narrowest, with walls that rose 100 feet on either side. It was the kind of place where an army could be stopped by a handful of men with rifles in good positions. It was the kind of place where ambushes happened and people died. "They'll have left someone behind," she said, "watching their back trail." "How many?" "At least 2, maybe 3. Eva pulled out the brass spyglass she had brought from home, her father's glass salvaged from his saddlebags after he died. Through it she could see the detail of the rocks, the shadows where a man might hide, the glint of something metallic about halfway up the left wall. "There," she said, handing the glass to Toby. "See that flash rifle barrel catching the sun?" Toby looked. "I see it. 1 man at least." "There'll be more." Eva's mind was working, calculating angles and distances the way her father had taught her. "They have the high ground. If we ride through the pass, they'll cut us down before we make it halfway. We'll be fish in a barrel." "So what do we do?" Eva pulled the sharps from its scabbard. The rifle felt right in her hands, like shaking hands with an old friend you have not seen in years but still know by heart. She had not fired it in 10 years, but her body remembered. Her hands knew where to go, how to hold it, how to breathe. "I go up," she said, pointing to a tumble of boulders on the right side of the pass. "Get above them. You two stay here with the horses. Stay hidden." "Ma'am, that's too dangerous," Toby protested. Eva looked at him with eyes that had gone flat and hard. "My daughter is on the other side of that pass. I'm going through. The only question is whether I go around these men or through them. I'd prefer around." She started climbing before anyone could argue further. The rocks were sharp and hot from the sun, radiating heat like a stove. Her hands found holds where her eyes saw none. Her boots found purchase on surfaces that seemed too smooth to climb. She moved quietly the way her father had taught her to move in the woods when hunting elk that could hear a pine needle fall. Every step was deliberate, every breath controlled, every movement calculated. It took 20 minutes to climb high enough. By the time she found her spot, a flat shelf of rock about 400 yards from the pass and 100 feet above it, sweat was running down her back and her hands were scraped raw and bleeding. But she had the angle she needed. She could see them now. 3 men, just as she had guessed. 2 on the left wall, 1 on the right. They were watching the trail below, rifles ready, waiting for anyone foolish enough to ride through. They were not watching above. Not watching the rocks. Not watching for a woman with her father's rifle and her father's skills, and nothing left to lose. Eva settled the sharps across a stable rock and peered through the sights. 3 men, 3 lives, 3 triggers she could pull. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, clear, as if he stood beside her. "A gun is just a tool. Eva girl, it's the hand that holds it that matters. It's the heart behind the hand that matters most." But what mattered now was Rose, her daughter, her baby, her entire world. Everything else was just wind and words. She settled her breathing, in, out, slow and steady the way her father had taught her. She felt the wind on her face, judged its speed and direction by the way it moved the sage below. She calculated the distance the drop of the bullet over 400 yards, the way the heat of the day would affect the trajectory. All of this her body did without thinking, trained by 10,000 hours of practice before she was 20. The crosshairs settled on the first man's shoulder. Not his head, not his heart. She had promised herself years ago that she would not become her father, would not become a killer, would not become the thing she feared most. But she could wound, she could stop, she could disable without destroying. She squeezed the trigger. The sharps roared, the sound enormous in the stillness, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder rolling down from heaven. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, familiar and brutal, a reminder that every action has consequences. Smoke obscured her vision for a moment. When it cleared, the first man was down, clutching his shoulder, screaming. The sound carried clearly in the thin mountain air. The other two scrambled for cover, confused, not knowing where the shot had come from, not understanding that death was watching from above. Eva worked the breech with practiced hands, ejecting the spent brass. The smell of burned powder filled her nose, acrid and sharp and familiar as an old enemy. She loaded anew round her hands, moving with the efficiency born of muscle memory. Aim, breathe, squeeze. The second shot took the man on the right in the thigh. He went down hard, his rifle clattering down the rocks with a sound like falling bells. 2 down, 1 to go. The third man was smarter than his companions. He had spotted the smoke from Eva's position. He swung his rifle around and fired wildly in her direction, panic making his aim poor. The bullet struck rock 10 feet to her left, spraying chips of stone that stung her face. Another shot, closer this time, close enough to matter. Eva did not flinch, did not hurry. She aimed carefully, took her time, made the shot count. The bullet struck the man's rifle, shattering the wooden stock and sending splinters into his face. He dropped the weapon and fell back, hands over his bleeding face, no longer a threat. 3 shots, 3 men down, none dead. Eva allowed herself a single breath of relief, then pushed it away. There was no time for relief. Not yet. Not until Rose was safe. "Toby!" she shouted down. "Come on through. It's clear." She climbed down, slipping twice on loose screes, scraping her knee badly enough to bleed through her dress. By the time she reached the bottom, Toby and Doc were riding into the pass. The 3 wounded men were trying to crawl away, leaving blood trails on the rocks like snails leave slime. Eva walked to the first man, the one she had shot in the shoulder. He was young, maybe 25, with a scraggly beard and eyes wide with pain and fear and the sudden realization that he was not invincible after all. She kicked his rifle away far out of reach and knelt beside him. "Where is Crow taking the hostages?" she demanded. The man spat blood. "Go to hell, lady." Eva pressed the barrel of the sharps against his wounded shoulder. Not hard, just enough pressure to remind him of the pain. The man screamed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. "Where?" she repeated, her voice calm, patient, implacable. "Devil's Backbone," he gasped, words tumbling over each other. 3 days northwest. There's an old mining camp. That's all I know. I swear to God, that's all I know." Eva studied his face. He was telling the truth. She could see it in his eyes, in the way his pupils dilated, in the tremor in his voice. She stood and looked at Toby. "Tie them up. We'll send the marshal back for them when this is done." "Ma'am, shouldn't we question them more? Get more information? We have what we need." She checked the sun. Still 4 hours of daylight left. Still time to cover ground. "We keep moving." Doc Whitmore had climbed down from his wagon and was examining the wounded men with professional detachment, his face showing neither approval nor disapproval. "This one needs a tourniquet," he said, pointing to the man with the thigh wound. "He'll bleed out otherwise. Maybe an hour, maybe less." "So save him," Eva said. Doc looked at her strangely. "These men were trying to kill us." "I know. Save them anyway." She walked away, back to her horse, back to the trail, back to the hunt. Her hands were shaking now. Fine tremors, she could not control the aftermath of violence catching up with her body, even as her mind stayed cold and clear. She had shot 3 men, wounded them deliberately, carefully, with shots her father would have been proud of. But she had not killed. That line, at least, she had not crossed. Not yet. Toby finished tying up the prisoners with rope from his saddle and walked over to where Eva stood, checking Patience's hooves. "Ma'am," he said quietly, That was some shooting. I've never seen anything like it. It was necessary. You could have killed them easy. Would have been safer. Yes. Why didn't you? Eva looked at him, this boy barely old enough to shave, wearing a badge and thinking he understood the world because he had read some dime novels about the Wild West. Because my daughter is going to ask me what I did to get her back, and I want to be able to look her in the eye when I answer. They rode on. The wounded men would live or die on their own merits. Eva had done what she could, more than they deserved probably, but she would not have their deaths on her conscience, would not add their ghosts to the ones that already haunted her dreams. The trail beyond Widow's Pass led through pine forest, dark and cool after the sun-blasted rocks. The scent of resin was thick in the air, almost overwhelming. Somewhere a woodpecker hammered at dead wood, the sound echoing like distant gunfire, like a reminder of what was to come. Eva's mind worked as they rode. She thought about the man she had just interrogated. Devil's Backbone. She knew the place, or knew of it at least, an old silver mining camp abandoned when the vein played out back in '79. Remote, defensible, water and shelter. Crow could hold up there for weeks if he wanted, if he had supplies, if he had a plan. But why? Why take hostages at all? The money from the bank was enough to set a man up for life, if he was careful, if he was smart. Why complicate things by adding kidnapping to robbery? Why risk a noose for crimes you did not need to commit, unless the money was not the point? Unless Crow needed something else. Leverage, maybe. Insurance against pursuit. Or maybe Eva thought with a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Maybe he just enjoyed the cruelty of it. Maybe he was the kind of man who took pleasure in other people's pain. Eva realized she knew almost nothing about this man, except that he had killed her father and now had her daughter. She did not know his motives, his history, his weaknesses, his fears. She was riding blind into a confrontation with a man who was by all accounts a professional killer. A man who had survived 10 years on the run, who had built a gang, who had executed a bank robbery with military precision. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made her angry. Anger was good. Anger she could use. Anger kept the fear at bay. As the sun began its long descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, they made camp beside a creek that ran clear and cold over smooth stones. Toby built a small fire, just enough to boil coffee and heat some beans from the supplies Doc had brought. Doc tended to Eva's scraped knee, wrapping it with clean bandage despite her protests that it was nothing, just a scratch. "Infection is never nothing," he said firmly. "I've seen men lose legs over scratches that seemed like nothing at the time." They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight, a coyote called, lonely and distant, the sound of the wild country asserting itself. The stars emerged one by one, so many you could never count them all, scattered across the black sky like spilled diamonds, like promises, like hopes. Eva sat with her back against a pine tree, the sharps across her knees. She was cleaning it, running an oiled cloth down the barrel with slow, meditative strokes, checking the action, making sure everything worked as it should. The work was familiar, calming. Her father had taught her this too. A clean weapon is a reliable weapon. Reliability keeps you alive when skill alone is not enough. Toby watched her work for a while. Finally, he spoke. "Mrs. Hartwell, can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "That man back there, the one you shot in the shoulder, he said Devil's Backbone. You think he was telling the truth?" "Yes." "How do you know?" Eva looked up from her work. "Because he was more afraid of this rifle than he was of Silas Crow. That kind of fear doesn't lie. Can't lie. It's too pure. You've done this before, haven't you? The tracking, the shooting, the questioning." "No," Eva said. "I've never done any of this before, but my father did, and I remember what he taught me, every lesson, every word." "Must have been some teacher." "He was." Eva set the rifle aside and poured herself more coffee from the battered pot, the liquid thick and black and bitter. "He taught me to shoot when I was 10. By the time I was 16, I could outshoot most men in the territory. He said I had a gift, a natural talent." "So why'd you stop?" The question hung in the air between them. Eva stared into her coffee cup, seeing her reflection ripple in the dark liquid. "Because the day I turned 16, I watched my father get shot out of his saddle by a bushwhacker. I held him while he died. His last words to me were, "Don't let this make you hard, Eva girl." So I walked away from it, met Marcus, got married, had Rose, thought I could live a different life, thought I could be something other than my father's daughter. And now I'm exactly what I swore I'd never become. Toby was quiet for a long moment. "No, ma'am," he said finally. "You're a mother saving her daughter. That's different. That's something else entirely." Eva smiled, but there was no humor in it, no warmth. "Tell me that when this is over. Ask me then what I've become." She lay down to sleep, using her saddle as a pillow, the sharps within arm's reach where she could grab it in an instant. Above her the stars wheeled slowly through their ancient dance, the same dance they had danced when her father was alive, the same dance they would dance when she was dead and forgotten. She thought about Rose, wondered if her daughter could see the same stars, wondered if she was cold, if she was afraid, if she knew her mother was coming. "Hold on, baby," Eva thought as sleep took her. "Mama's coming. I promise." But sleep brought no rest. She dreamed of her father's face of blood on Wyoming dust, of an X-shaped scar on the back of a hand. She woke before dawn, cold and stiff, to find frost on her blanket, and her breath misting in the air like ghosts. They broke camp quickly and rode on into the second day. Hours have passed since Eva began her story. The fire has burned low, and shadows deepen in the farmhouse corners. Lily shifts on her stool, leaning closer, her young face intent in the dimness. "Grandma," she whispers, "were you scared?" Eva Hartwell, 56 years old and bearing the weight of 3 decades like a well-worn saddle, looks at her granddaughter with eyes that have seen too much and forgotten nothing. "Terrified," she says simply. But fear doesn't stop a mother. It just makes her more dangerous, more focused, more willing to do what needs doing. She rocks slowly in her father's chair, the wood creaking a rhythm older than memory. "Let me tell you about the chase." The story resumes in the Wyoming wilderness, September 1887, the second day. 3 riders following 14. The mathematics of it were absurd impossible. Eva knew this. Toby knew this. Even Doc Whitmore, carrying more weight than was healthy and wheezing in his wagon seat, knew this. But knowing a thing and accepting it are different animals entirely. They rode through country that had not changed since the world was young. Sage-covered hills rolled away to distant mountains, their peaks already white with early snow that would not melt until spring. Ravens circled overhead, black crosses against a sky so blue it hurt to look at for too long. The wind carried the smell of pine and dust, and that faint copper scent that comes before a storm, before violence, before change. Eva led as she had led since leaving Redemption Creek. She had tied her red hair back with a strip of leather, and her eyes never stopped moving, never stopped reading the land. She saw what others would miss: a broken branch at shoulder height where a careless rider had passed too close. Hoofprints pressed deep into the mud beside a creek, telling her the horses were tired, the riders pushing them harder than was wise. A pile of manure still steaming in the morning cold, no more than 2 hours old. Fresh, recent, close. "They're slowing down," she said, pulling Patience to a halt at the top of a rise. "Getting confident." Toby rode up beside her. The boy was 17, all elbows and enthusiasm, with a Winchester rifle that looked too big for his thin frame. He had been deputized exactly 3 weeks ago, and his badge was still shiny enough to catch the sun. "How can you tell, ma'am?" Eva pointed at the tracks in the soft earth. "See how the prints are closer together. The horses are walking now, not cantering. Crow thinks nobody's following. He thinks we're still in town, wringing our hands and waiting for the marshal to save us." "He doesn't know you," Doc said from his wagon, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "No," Eva agreed. "He doesn't." She thought about that X-shaped scar on Silas Crow's hand. She had seen it only once before, in the worst moment of her life. She was 16, standing over her father's body, watching a figure on horseback disappear into the tree line. She had been too shocked to chase too young to understand what she was seeing, what it meant. But she had seen that scar, backlit by afternoon sun, unmistakable as a brand. For 10 years she had wondered. For 10 years the question had burned in her gut like undigested meat, like poison. Who killed my father and why? Now she had a name. Silas Crow. And she would have answers one way or another. Dead or alive, she would have answers. The trail led them into rougher country as the day wore on. The sage gave way to juniper and pinon pine. Rock outcroppings rose like broken teeth from the earth, ancient stone carved by wind and water into shapes that looked almost deliberate, almost meaningful. This was old land shaped by forces beyond human understanding. It was beautiful in a harsh way, and it was deadly if you did not respect it, and Eva respected it the way her father had taught her to respect anything that could kill you. They stopped at noon to water the horses at a spring that bubbled from between two boulders cold enough to make your teeth ache. Eva filled her canteen and studied the tracks around the spring with the intensity of someone reading a loved one's last letter. 14 horses had stopped here recently. She could see where the men had dismounted, could make out the individual boot prints in the soft earth, could almost smell their presence. One set of prints was smaller, child-sized, rose. Eva knelt and touched the print with her fingertips as gently as if it were something sacred. Her daughter had stood here maybe 6 hours ago, maybe less. Had she been crying? Had she been brave? Had she remembered what her mother taught her about being strong when strength was the only choice you had? Eva closed her eyes and sent a prayer to whatever God might be listening. Keep her strong. Keep her safe. Let me get there in time. Please. I'm begging you. Just let me get there in time. Mrs. Hartwell, Toby said. His voice was careful, gentle. He was pointing at the mud beside Rose's footprint. Eva looked. Beside the child's print, scratched into the mud with a stick, were letters. Crude, hurried, but unmistakable. Mama. Eva's breath caught in her throat. Her daughter had left her a message. A simple word, but it carried everything a mother needed to hear. I'm alive. I'm thinking of you. I'm waiting for you. I know you're coming. She touched the letters gently as if they were made of something precious and fragile, as if a hard touch might erase them. I'm coming, baby, she whispered. I'm coming as fast as I can. Toby cleared his throat. Ma'am, we're getting close, real close. We need to be careful from here on. They might have more men watching the back trail. Eva stood, her face hard again, all traces of emotion locked away behind walls of necessity. How far to Devil's Backbone? Maybe 10 miles, through some of the worst country in the territory. Then we go slow, and we go quiet, and we go ready. They moved through the afternoon like ghosts, making no more noise than the wind makes through the pines. Eva's senses were heightened to a pitch she had not felt since she was a girl hunting with her father. Every nerve alive, every sense sharp. She saw everything the way the pine needles lay on the ground undisturbed by recent passage. The scratch marks on tree bark where deer had rubbed their antlers in the fall. The single raven that followed them for an hour before veering away as if it knew where they were going and wanted no part of it. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, they crested a ridge and looked down into a narrow valley. At the far end, maybe 2 miles distant, Eva could see buildings. The old mining camp. Even from here, through her father's spyglass, she could make out the main structure, a long, low building with a sagging roof that had probably been the bunkhouse. Around it, smaller shacks and lean-tos, most of them half collapsed. And in the clearing in front, horses. Many horses. Eva counted them carefully, methodically, missing nothing. 14, as expected. So Crow had not split his force, had not sent men in different directions to confuse pursuit. All his men were there in one place. That made things easier in some ways, harder in others. Easier because she knew where everyone was. Harder because she was outnumbered 14-3, and those were terrible odds no matter how you calculated them. She studied the camp carefully through the spyglass, memorizing every detail the way her father had taught her to memorize terrain before a battle. The cabin where the hostages would likely be held, the one with bars on the windows. The positions where guards would be posted, the natural choke points. The routes of approach and escape, the places where cover was good and where it was non-existent. She was building a map in her mind the way her father had taught her. Know the battlefield before you step onto it. Know it better than your enemy knows it. Know it so well you could walk it blind. We wait until dark, she said, lowering the spyglass. Then we get closer. Close enough to see what we're dealing with. Close enough to make a plan that might actually work. They made a cold camp in a hollow below the ridge, no fire, nothing that might give them away to watchful eyes. Eva chewed on jerky that tasted like leather soaked in salt and drank water that tasted like tin. Her stomach was tight with anticipation, and fear twisted into knots that made eating difficult. But she forced herself to eat anyway, forced herself to drink. Her father's voice again clear as if he stood beside her. A soldier fights on her belly. Starve yourself and you'll die stupid. As twilight deepened into true darkness, Eva checked her weapons with meticulous care. The sharps was loaded and ready. She had her father's old Colt revolver as well, a .45 that kicked like an angry mule but shot true if you knew how to handle it. 60 rounds total for the sharps, 40 in the belt pouch, 20 more in her saddlebag for reserve, 18 rounds for the Colt. Against 11 men, assuming the 3 she had wounded at Widow's Pass were no longer in the fight. The odds were still terrible, but they were better than they had been yesterday. And they would get better still, or they would get worse, and either way, she would deal with it when it came. Full dark came, and with it a cold wind from the north that smelled like snow, like winter coming early, like change. Eva moved to the ridge and looked down at the camp through the darkness. Fires had been lit orange points of light in the blackness that marked where the outlaws felt safe. She could hear faint sounds drifting up on the wind, men talking, laughing, the whinny of a horse, the clink of bottles. They felt safe here, secure in their isolation. That was good. Overconfidence was a weakness she could exploit. She turned to Toby and Doc, her face barely visible in the starlight. "I'm going down alone. You two find a good vantage point somewhere with clear sight lines to the camp. When you hear shooting, and you will hear shooting, you know what to do." "Which is what exactly?" Doc asked. "Create confusion. Make them think they're surrounded. Fire into the air, into the ground, doesn't matter. Just make noise. Make them panic. Panic makes people stupid." Toby shook his head. "Ma'am, we should stick together. 3 guns are better than 1. No. If something happens to me, if I fail, you two get out. Ride back to Redemption Creek. Find the marshal. Tell him everything. Make sure Crow doesn't get away with this." "And leave Rose?" Eva's jaw tightened, muscle jumping beneath the skin. "If I fail, you won't be able to save her anyway. But you can make sure Crow hangs for what he's done. That's worth something. That has to be worth something." She did not wait for further argument. She started down the slope, moving from shadow to shadow, the sharp slung across her back. The descent took an hour every step, careful, every breath controlled, every sound muffled. She was hunting now, and the old skills her father had drilled into her took over like a second skin. She became part of the darkness, formless and silent, a ghost in her own right. She reached the edge of the camp and crouched behind a stack of old lumber, rotting and worthless, watching. 11 men scattered around the fires. Most were drinking from bottles, passing them back and forth, their voices loud and careless. 2 stood guard, but they were lazy about it, confident that no pursuit had come, that no one was foolish enough or brave enough or desperate enough to follow them into the wilderness. They were wrong about that. Dead wrong. Eva spotted the cabin where the hostages were kept. A single guard sat outside the door, a rifle across his knees, his head nodding forward as sleep tried to claim him. Drunk or exhausted or both. It did not matter. He was not alert. He was not ready. He was not expecting death to come calling on a September night. She considered her options with cold calculation. She could pick off men from here one by one with the sharps. But the moment she fired, they would know where she was, would know someone was out here in the darkness. She would get maybe 3 shots, maybe 4 if she was very lucky, and very fast before they pinned her down. 3 men against 11 were still bad odds. No. She needed a better angle, higher ground, a position where she could control the field of fire, where they would have to come to her uphill exposed, silhouetted against their own fires. She spotted it, a rocky outcrop about 600 yards to the north, elevated enough to give her line of sight over the entire camp. It would be a hard shot in the darkness, shooting by firelight and starlight and nothing else, but possible. Difficult, but possible. And once she was up there, they would have to come to her or abandon the camp entirely. She began to move toward it, keeping to the deepest shadows, moving when the wind gusted and covered the sound of her passage. She was halfway there when a voice rang out loud and familiar, stopping her cold. "Flint Hartwell's daughter, I know you're out there." Eva froze, every muscle locked. Silas Crow stood in the center of the camp, backlit by firelight, his arms spread wide like a preacher calling down heaven. "I know you followed us. I knew you would, a woman with fire in her belly and murder in her heart. just like your daddy was, just like the old man. He was trying to provoke her, trying to draw her out. Eva forced herself to remain still, to breathe, to think. This was a trap, a test. He was not certain she was here. He was guessing, fishing, hoping to spook her into revealing herself. She stayed hidden, watching, waiting, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I want to talk to you," Crow shouted into the darkness. "Come on out. Let's settle this like civilized folk. Nobody else has to get hurt. We can make a deal." Eva almost laughed at that. Civilized. From a man who kidnapped children and murdered from ambush. But she stayed hidden, invisible, patient as stone. Crow waited, listening to the silence. When no answer came, he shrugged, a gesture of exaggerated disappointment. "All right, then. Have it your way." He turned and walked to the cabin with slow, deliberate steps. A moment later he emerged, dragging someone by the arm. Rose. Eva's heart stopped. Her daughter looked so small in Crow's grip, so fragile. 7 years old and terrified, but trying to be brave, trying to be strong the way her mother had taught her. But she was not crying. Her face was set, determined, even though Eva could see her shaking. Brave girl. Eva's girl. Crow pulled a revolver from his belt and pressed it against Rose's head. The barrel looked enormous against her small skull. "Last chance, Mrs. Hartwell. I know that's your name. Show yourself or the girl dies. I'll count to 10. 1. Eva's mind raced, calculating possibilities, weighing options. If she revealed herself, Crow would kill her and Rose both. He had no reason to keep either of them alive, no reason to honor any bargain. But if she did nothing, if she stayed hidden, he would kill Rose anyway, just to prove he was serious. 2. There was no good choice, only bad ones and worse ones, only degrees of terrible. 3. Eva started to stand, started to step into the light, and offer herself in exchange when something unexpected happened. Something that changed everything. Rose, 7 years old, and terrified, and braver than anyone had a right to expect, bit down hard on Silas Crow's hand, bit him hard enough to draw blood, hard enough to make him scream. Crow jerked back, cursing. The gun discharged, firing into the air, the sound enormous. Rose twisted free and ran, not toward the darkness where Eva hid, not toward escape, but into the cabin, slamming the door behind her. Smart girl. She had made herself a harder target. She had given her mother a chance. Crow cursed viciously, clutching his bleeding hand. "You little devil, fine. We'll do this the hard way." He drew a second revolver from his other holster and fired 3 shots into the cabin door. Wood splintered. Inside, Eva heard screaming. She could not tell if it was Rose or one of the other hostages. Could not tell if her daughter was hurt, bleeding, dying. Everything inside Eva went cold and clear and sharp as broken glass. The fear fell away like a discarded coat. The doubt fell away like dead leaves. What remained was pure purpose, deadly and focused and unstoppable. She unslung the sharps and moved toward the outcrop, no longer caring about stealth, caring only about speed. Speed mattered now. Only speed. Only getting to a position where she could end this. She reached the rocks and scrambled up, scraping her hands bloody, tearing her dress, not caring. She found a flat spot, wedged herself into position, and brought the rifle to her shoulder. 600 yards to the camp. Night shooting. Moving targets. Impossible for most people. Difficult even for her. But Rose was in that cabin, and that made the impossible merely hard. She found Silas Crow in her sights. He was reloading his revolvers, his back partially turned, silhouetted by firelight. An easy shot. A killing shot. She could end him right now. Could put a bullet through his skull and watch him drop and know that her father was avenged, that justice had been served, that evil had been punished. Her finger rested on the trigger. All the years of training, all her father's lessons, all the skills she had spent 10 years trying to forget it all, led to this moment. One squeeze, one breath, one bullet, one death. But she heard her father's voice as clear as if he stood beside her in the darkness. "I taught you to shoot straight, Eva girl. Life taught you to shoot true. Straight is the bullet, true is the heart. Remember the difference." Eva shifted her aim. Not the head, not the chest, the right shoulder, high and outside. Enough to disable his gun hand, to take him out of the fight, but not to kill. Not to end him. because her daughter was watching from that cabin, and Eva wanted Rose to see that her mother could be strong without being cruel, could be dangerous without being a killer, could choose mercy when vengeance would be easier. She breathed out slowly, let half the air escape her lungs. Squeezed. The sharps roared. Across 600 yards of darkness the bullet flew true as a prayer. It struck Silas Crow in the right shoulder, spinning him around, dropping him to the ground like a puppet with cut strings. The camp erupted in chaos. Men grabbed weapons, shouted in confusion, fired wildly into the darkness. They could not see Eva, could not tell where the shot had come from, could not understand that death was watching from above. Eva worked the breech, the motion automatic ingrained. Loaded, aimed, fired. A man near the fire went down, clutching his leg, screaming. Load. Aim. Fire. Another man dropped his rifle, clattering away into the darkness. From the east, Toby's Winchester cracked once, twice, the shots sharp and clear. From the south, Doc's shotgun boomed, the sound enormous, echoing off the valley walls. The outlaws were surrounded, or thought they were. Some ran for the horses, others dove for cover. Panic spread like wildfire. Eva kept firing, each shot deliberate, each target chosen with care. She was not trying to kill. Just stop. Just disable. Just remove pieces from the board one by one until only Crow remained. The sharps grew hot in her hands from rapid firing. Smoke stung her eyes, making them water. Her shoulder ached from the brutal recoil, would be black and blue tomorrow if she lived to see tomorrow. But she did not stop. Could not stop. Not while Rose was still in danger. Not while her daughter needed her. A bullet struck rock near her head, spraying sharp chips that cut her cheek. They had spotted her muzzle flash, had figured out where she was. She rolled to a new position, came up firing. 2 more shots. 2 more men down, wounded but alive. And then the sharps clicked empty. Eva's hands flew to the ammunition pouch at her belt. Empty. She had fired every round, 40 shots in 2 days of fighting. The 20 rounds in her saddlebag were back with the horses, useless to her. Now might as well be on the moon. She drew her father's Colt revolver, but she knew it was useless at this range. 600 yards. A pistol at 600 yards was like throwing rocks, worse than useless. Below, the camp had gone quiet. Bodies lay scattered across the clearing, some moving and groaning, some ominously still. Eva counted quickly, her mind cold and clear. 9 men down. 2 had fled on horseback when the shooting started, vanishing into the darkness like smoke, leaving their companions to whatever fate awaited them. That left Crow wounded but alive somewhere in the chaos below. She started to climb down, moving as fast as she dared on the treacherous rocks, when she heard a voice, weak but defiant, young but brave. Mama? Rose. Alive. Calling for her. Eva abandoned all caution and ran. Slid down the rocks, not caring about the sharp edges that tore her hands and dress. Sprinted across open ground, bullets kicking up dirt around her feet, but she did not slow. Did not stop, did not think. She hit the cabin door with her shoulder, slamming it open with enough force to tear it half off its hinges. Inside was darkness and chaos and the smell of fear. She could hear crying, whimpering prayers. "Rose," she shouted. "Rose, where are you? Here, Mama, here." Eva followed the voice and found her daughter huddled in the corner with the other hostages. She pulled Rose into her arms and held her so tight the girl gasped for breath, but she did not let go. Could not let go. Not yet. "I've got you," Eva whispered, her voice breaking. "I've got you. You're safe now. I promise you're safe." She cut the ropes binding the other hostages with her knife, her hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. The banker, his wife, the boy. "Get out," she ordered. "Run. Head north. You'll find my friends on the ridge. Doc Whitmore. Go. Now." They fled into the darkness. Eva picked up Rose, her daughter's arms tight around her neck, and turned to leave. Silas Crow filled the doorway. He was bleeding heavily from the shoulder, his right arm hanging useless at his side, but he held a revolver in his left hand. Behind him the camp was silent. His men were dead or fled or wounded beyond fighting. He had lost everything. The money, his gang, his freedom, his future, all of it gone in a single night. "You," he said, his voice thick with pain and rage and something that might have been grudging respect. "Flint's girl. You did this. All of this." Eva set Rose down gently behind her and stepped forward, putting herself between her daughter and the gun. The Colt was still holstered at her hip. She had not reloaded it, had not had time, but it did not matter. She would not draw, would not shoot, would not kill this man in front of her daughter if there was any other way. "It's over, Crow," she said quietly. "Drop the gun. Your men are down. The law is coming. It's over. Not until I finish what I started 10 years ago." "Why?" The question burst from Eva before she could stop it, raw and desperate. "Why did you kill my father? What did he ever do to you?" Crow laughed and blood bubbled from his lips. "Silver mine. Up in the hills near your old ranch. Your daddy owned the land. I found the vein. Offered him partnership. 50-50. We both would have been rich. But no. Flint Hartwell couldn't abide working with a man like me. A man who understood that the world don't reward virtue, only strength. So you murdered him." "I removed an obstacle. I shot him from 300 yards while he was checking fence line on that worthless ranch of his. Clean shot. One bullet. He never knew what hit him. Never had a chance." Crow's face twisted with something that might have been regret. "And you know what the joke is that mine played out 6 months later. Barely pulled enough silver to cover the equipment costs. I killed a good man for nothing. Killed him for dirt and empty promises." Eva's hand moved toward the Colt at her hip. Her fingers wrapped around the grip, and for a moment she saw it clearly, drawing the weapon, firing, watching Crow's blood water the Wyoming earth. Justice, vengeance, an ending her father deserved. An ending she had dreamed about for 10 years. But Rose's weight against her back anchored her. Her daughter's heart beat steady and trusting and alive. Eva's hand fell away from the gun. "You'll hang for what you did," she said quietly. "But it'll be the law that does it, not me. Not in front of my daughter." Crow studied her with eyes that were starting to glaze from blood loss. "Your father raised you different than I thought. You got his skill, but not his hardness. I can't figure if that makes you stronger or weaker. Ask me after the trial." For a long moment everything balanced on a knife's edge. Then Crow's hand began to lower. The gun dipped. His eyes went somewhere else, seeing something Eva could not see, remembering something she would never know. "Your father," he said quietly, "was a better man than me. I know. And you're a better shot. I know that too." The gun fell from Crow's hand, clattering on the wooden floor. He sank to his knees, still bleeding, and did not resist when Toby appeared in the doorway and bound his wrists with rope. Eva turned and gathered Rose into her arms one more time. Her daughter was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook her small frame, but she was alive, whole, safe. "It's over, baby," Eva whispered into her daughter's hair. "It's over. We're going home." But even as she said it, she knew it was not quite true. The fight was over. The chase was done. But Silas Crow still lived, and there were questions still unanswered, and the journey back to Redemption Creek would be long and hard, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The story was not finished yet. The fire in the farmhouse has burned down to ashes and memory. Outside, the Wyoming wind has picked up, rattling the windows, promising snow before morning. Lily sits transfixed, barely breathing, her young face painted in shades of shadow. "Grandma," she breathes, "what happened next?" Eva Hartwell shifts in her rocking chair, the wood protesting with a familiar creak. At 56, her body carries the accumulated cost of every choice she has ever made. The scar on her left shoulder from a bullet that came too close. The crooked finger broken when a horse threw her in 93. The lines around her eyes from squinting into too many sunsets and seeing too many things she wished she could forget. But her gaze remains clear-focused, sharp, as the day she dug up her father's grave. "What happened next," she says slowly, "was the hardest part. Because taking a man down is one thing. Deciding what to do with him after, that's another thing entirely. That's when you find out who you really are." She reaches for the Sharps rifle mounted above the mantel, lifts it down with reverent care. The walnut stock is worn smooth by 3 generations of hands. The barrel still gleams with oil, still ready, still waiting. Eva runs her fingers over the initials carved into the brass plate NH. Beneath them, newer cuts, EH, and beneath those, space waiting LH. "Let me tell you about reckoning," she says. The story resumes in the wreckage of Devil's Backbone Mining Camp, September 1887. Dawn was breaking cold and gray over the mountains, the sun still hidden behind the peaks, but its light painting the sky in shades of steel. Smoke from the previous night's fires hung in the air like ghosts that refused to leave. Around the camp, wounded men groaned and cursed and prayed. Some would live, some would not. Eva had stopped counting which was which. She sat on a chunk of broken timber. Rose clutched tight against her chest. Her daughter had finally stopped crying and fallen into an exhausted sleep. Her small fingers twisted in Eva's torn dress, her face streaked with dirt and tears but unmarked by violence. Unharmed, whole, alive. That was all that mattered. That was everything. Toby Mercer moved through the camp like a ghost among ghosts, collecting weapons, checking pulses, doing the grim mathematics of survival that someone had to do. Doc Whitmore worked on the wounded with the same professional detachment he applied to everyone, outlaw and innocent alike. His oath was to heal, and he kept it without judgment, without question, without hesitation. Silas Crow sat with his back against a wagon wheel, hands bound behind him, shoulder bandaged with strips torn from someone's shirt. The bullet had gone clean through missing bone and artery by margins too small to calculate or understand. He would live to stand trial. Eva had made certain of that, had chosen it, had aimed for the shoulder instead of the heart. She studied him across the dying fires. In the harsh morning light, he looked smaller than he had the night before. Just a man bleeding and beaten and broken. The mythology of him had burned away with the gunpowder smoke. What remained was ordinary, human, mortal. He met her gaze and did not look away. "You should have killed me," he said. His voice was rough, damaged by a night of pain. "Would have been cleaner, easier, better for everyone." "Cleaner for who?" Eva asked. "Both of us." He coughed and fresh blood appeared at the corners of his mouth. "Now I hang slow in front of a crowd, and you live the rest of your life knowing you could have ended it quick." "I'll live with it just fine." Crow smiled without humor, without hope. "Will you?" "I wonder about that." He shifted, wincing at the movement. "Your father now, he would have killed me. No hesitation, no mercy. Flint Hartwell was a hard man when he needed to be." "Don't talk about my father." "Why not? He's the reason we're both here, isn't he?" Crow's eyes were fever-bright, glittering with pain and something else. "That silver mine, that's what started all this. Your daddy's stubborn pride, his refusal to compromise." Eva felt Rose stir against her chest and lowered her voice to barely above a whisper. "My father was an honest man who earned his land and defended his rights. You're a thief and a murderer who wanted something that wasn't yours. Don't confuse the two. Don't try to make yourself equal to him." "Honest." Crow laughed, then coughed again, harder this time. "He was sitting on a fortune and too proud to share it, too proud to see reality. I offered partnership, 50-50, fair terms. We both would have been rich beyond our dreams. But no, Flint Hartwell couldn't abide working with a man like me, a man who understood that the world don't reward virtue, only strength, only the willingness to take what you want. So you shot him in the back like a coward." "I shot him from 300 yards while he was checking fence line on that worthless ranch of his. Clean shot. One bullet, professional. He never knew what hit him, never felt any pain." Crow's face twisted with something that looked almost like shame. "And you know what the real joke is? What makes it all meaningless that mine played out 6 months later? Barely pulled enough silver to cover the equipment costs. I killed a good man for nothing, killed him for a dream that turned to dirt in my hands." Eva's hand moved to the Colt at her hip. Her fingers wrapped around the grip, and for a moment she saw it with perfect clarity, drawing the weapon, firing into Crow's heart, watching his blood water the Wyoming earth, and knowing her father was avenged. Justice. Vengeance. An ending. But Rose's weight against her chest anchored her to something better. Her daughter's heartbeat steady and trusting and innocent. The next generation. The future. Eva's hand fell away from the gun. "You'll hang for what you did," she said quietly, each word deliberate. "But it'll be the law that does it, not me. Not vigilante justice. Real justice. The kind that means something." Crow studied her with something that might have been respect, might have been incomprehension. "Your father raised you different than I thought. You got his skill but not his hardness, his talent but not his ruthlessness. I can't figure if that makes you stronger or weaker than him. Ask me after the trial. Ask me in 10 years. Maybe by then I'll know the answer myself. Doc Whitmore approached, wiping bloody hands on a rag that was more blood than cloth now. His face was gray with exhaustion, his eyes red-rimmed. 9 wounded, he reported in a flat voice. 2 won't make it through the day. Gut shot, both of them. Nothing I can do except make them comfortable. The rest might survive if we get them to proper medical care soon, very soon. And the hostages? Eva asked, though she already knew most of the answer. The banker has 2 broken ribs from where one of these fools kicked him. His wife is in shock but physically unharmed. The boy has a nasty cut on his forehead, might scar, but nothing that won't heal. Doc's eyes softened as they found Rose's sleeping face. Your daughter is a wonder. 7 years old, and she kept the others calm through the whole ordeal, told them stories, made them believe rescue was coming, kept hope alive when hope was all they had. Eva looked down at Rose's sleeping face, feeling pride and love and terror war in her chest. She's braver than I ever was at her age, braver than I am now. She's her mother's daughter, Doc said simply. And that's the highest compliment I know how to give. Toby finished his circuit of the camp and returned carrying an armload of weapons that looked too heavy for his thin frame. Revolvers, rifles, knives, even a sawed-off shotgun that was illegal in 3 territories. Ma'am, he said, his young face serious, we've got a problem. Actually, we've got several problems, but one of them is urgent. Tell me. Transportation. We've got 14 prisoners if you count the wounded, 4 hostages, 3 of us, and we're 3 days hard ride from Redemption Creek with 2 wagons and maybe 20 horses, half of which are worn out from being ridden too hard. Eva calculated quickly, her mind working through possibilities. How many prisoners can walk on their own? 5 if we go slow and stop frequently. The rest need to be carried or they'll die on the trail, maybe sooner. Then we make 2 trips. You and Doc take the wounded and the hostages back first. Get them to safety, get them medical care. I'll stay here with the ones who can walk and guard them until you return. Toby's young face creased with worry. Ma'am, that leaves you alone with 5 outlaws for at least 6 days, maybe longer if we run into weather. That's not safe. That's asking for trouble. I'll have the sharps, and they'll have the knowledge that if they try anything, I've already proven I can hit them from 600 yards in the dark. She met Crow's eyes across the camp. I don't think they'll test me twice. Do you, Mr. Crow? She's right, Crow said, his voice surprisingly strong. We won't. None of us will. Tell your men to stand down, Mrs. Hartwell. We're done fighting. Doc nodded, slowly accepting the logic, if not liking it. It's the best plan we have under the circumstances. But Mrs. Hartwell, you need rest. Real rest. You've been awake for near 40 hours straight. You've been shot at. You've climbed rocks. You've fought a battle. You need to sleep or you'll collapse. I'll rest when Rose is safe in Redemption Creek, Eva said, standing carefully adjusting her sleeping daughter's weight. Load the wagons. I want you on the trail within the hour, before the day gets hot. They worked quickly and efficiently, everyone knowing their role without being told. The wounded were placed in the wagons on beds of blankets made as comfortable as circumstances allowed. The banker and his wife climbed aboard, still shaken but beginning to show signs of recovery. The boy insisted on riding one of the captured horses, and after a moment's consideration and a nod from Eva, Toby allowed it. When everything was ready, when the wagons were packed and the horses harnessed, Doc walked over to where Eva stood holding Rose. He reached into his medical bag and pulled out a small brown bottle. Laudanum, he said. For pain. You've been shot, beaten, and run ragged. Your body needs help. I need to stay alert. Can't afford to be foggy. You need to not collapse from exhaustion and leave 5 prisoners unguarded in the wilderness. He pressed the bottle into her hand with gentle firmness. 2 drops in water before you sleep. No more than that. Promise me. I promise. Doc looked at her for a long moment, his tired eyes seeing more than she wanted to show. What you did last night, that shooting in the dark across impossible distance with precision that I've never seen in 30 years of frontier medicine, your father would have been proud. More than proud. He would have been amazed. Eva's throat tightened. My father would have told me I was a fool for not killing them when I had the chance, for choosing mercy over certainty. Then your father would have been wrong, and I think deep down he would have known it. Doc climbed into the lead wagon and took up the reins. "We'll be back in 6 days. Try not to get yourself killed in the meantime." Rose woke as the wagons began to move the creak and rattle, pulling her from sleep. She looked around momentarily confused, her eyes still puffy from crying. Then she focused on her mother's face. "Mama, are we going home?" "Soon, baby. Very soon. You're going ahead with Doc and Toby. I have to stay here for a few more days." "No." Rose's grip tightened with surprising strength. "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me again." Eva knelt so they were eye to eye so Rose could see the truth in her face. "Listen to me. Those people in the wagon, they need protection on the trail back to town. And Doc needs help taking care of the hurt men. You're the bravest person I know, Rosie. The absolute bravest. Can you be brave a little longer? Can you help Doc for me?" Rose's lower lip trembled, but she was her mother's daughter. She nodded. "Will you come home, promise?" "I promise. 6 days. I'll be right behind you. I'll be home before you know it." "You promise? Like when you promised Papa you'd take care of me. That kind of promise?" The words hit Eva like a physical blow. "I promise. On everything I hold sacred, on my life, on my love for you. I will come home." Rose hugged her mother fiercely, desperately, then allowed herself to be lifted into the wagon beside the banker's wife. As the wagons rolled out, raising dust that hung in the still morning air, Eva stood watching until they disappeared around the bend in the valley. Only then did she allow herself to feel the exhaustion, the fear, the bone-deep weariness of what she had done and what remained to be done. She turned back to the camp. 5 outlaws sat in a rough circle, hands bound, watching her with wary eyes that held calculation and fear in equal measure. Silas Crow among them. The camp was eerily quiet now, without the wounded men's groaning, without the hostages crying. Just the wind through the pines and the occasional stamp of a horse's hoof and the sound of her own breathing. Eva walked to the center of the circle and looked at each man in turn, meeting their eyes, making sure they understood. "Here's how this works," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the silence. "You do what I say when I say it exactly as I say it, and you might live to see trial. You cause trouble and I leave you here for the wolves and the weather. We understand each other." Muttered agreement. Nods. She had their attention. She had their fear. That was good. Fear kept people honest when nothing else would. "Good. First order of business, food and water. I'm not feeding you luxury, but I won't let you starve. You'll eat what I eat and be grateful for it. Second, if you need to relieve yourself, you ask permission. I'll untie one hand at a time under supervision. Third, nobody talks after dark. You sleep when I say sleep. You wake when I say wake. You breathe when I say breathe. Fourth and final." She paused, letting the silence build. "If any of you are thinking about trying to overpower one woman with one rifle, remember that this morning I put bullets in 9 men before breakfast. From 600 yards. In the dark. Think real hard about whether you want to test me. Think about whether you feel lucky." The biggest of the outlaws, a man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow and the look of someone who had done violence before, spat into the dirt. "You're just one woman with one rifle. You got to sleep sometime." Eva walked over to him and knelt down, bringing her face level with his. She looked at him with eyes colder than mountain snow in January. "You're absolutely right. I do have to sleep. And when I do, I'll tie you all to separate trees far enough apart that you can't help each other, but close enough that I can shoot you all from one position without moving. And I'll sleep with one eye open and both hands on my rifle. Your move, friend. Make it a good one." The man's bravado crumbled like wet paper. He looked away, his face flushing. Eva stood and addressed them all again. "Anybody else want to discuss the arrangement? Anybody else think they're smarter than me, tougher than me, luckier than me?" Silence, complete and total. "Excellent. Then let's get through this like civilized people. It's a long 6 days ahead of us." The first day passed in a haze of exhaustion and tension so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Eva rationed out food from the camp supplies hardtack that could break teeth, jerky that tasted like salted leather water from the creek that ran cold and clean. She allowed the prisoners to move around camp under close watch, let them stretch their legs, tend to their necessities, maintain what dignity remained to men who had bet everything on violence and lost. She was fair but firm, and they responded to it. Even Crow seemed to accept the new reality, offering no resistance, no complaints, no trouble. As evening fell and shadows lengthened across the valley, she tied each man to a separate tree as promised, checked the knots twice with her father's thoroughness, then built a small fire and made herself coffee. The sharps lay across her knees, loaded and ready. Her father's Colt was freshly loaded and within easy reach. She had created a fortress of firelight and angles and clear lines of sight, and anyone approaching would be visible long before they posed a threat, long before they could do anything that mattered. Silas Crow watched her from his tree, his face pale in the firelight. "You're good at this," he said after a long silence. "At what?" "Command, organization, keeping men in line." He shifted against the rough bark, grimacing at the pain. "You should have been a general. Could have been a general if you'd been born a man." "I'd rather be a mother. That's harder. That matters more." "Can't be both." Eva considered that question seriously. "I don't know. Maybe. But I never wanted to find out." She sipped her coffee. It was bitter and strong the way her father had taught her to make it decades ago. "I chose peace, Crow. I chose a quiet life. I chose to put down the gun. You took that choice from me. Seems to me you're pretty good at violence for someone who chose peace. Being good at something doesn't mean you want to do it, doesn't mean you should do it, doesn't mean it's the right choice." Crow was quiet for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the wind in the pines. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, softer, almost regretful, almost human. "For what it's worth, and I know it's worth nothing, I'm sorry about your father. I mean that. He was a good man, better than most, and I killed him for a worthless hole in the ground that gave me nothing but guilt. Don't apologize to me. You can't give me back what you took, can't undo what you did. I know that. But I can tell you the truth, and maybe truth counts for something." He coughed, grimacing at the pain in his shoulder. "The night before I shot him, I camped on your property without permission. Your father found me, could have run me off or shot me for trespassing, had every right to do both. Instead, he invited me to share his fire, fed me from his own supplies. We talked for hours about the war, about the territory, about what the future might hold. He was kind to me, actually kind." Eva felt something twist in her chest, sharp and painful. "And then you murdered him." "And then I murdered him," Crow agreed, his voice flat. "The very next day. Because kindness doesn't trump greed in my world, and I wanted that silver more than I valued his life. That's the truth of me. That's what I am. That's what I've always been." "Why are you telling me this now? What's the point?" "Because you're going to have to decide what to do with me. The judge, the jury. They'll make their decision based on law and evidence and precedent. But you, Mrs. Hartwell, you'll make yours based on something else, something deeper. And I want you to know exactly what you're deciding about. I want you to see me clearly. No illusions, no excuses." Eva stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and twist, casting shadows that reached toward the darkness beyond. "The law will hang you," she said. "That's enough for me. That has to be enough." "Is it? Or will you spend the rest of your life wondering if you should have pulled that trigger yourself, given your father the vengeance he deserves, given yourself the closure you need?" "My father doesn't deserve vengeance. He deserves to be remembered as a good man who died unjustly. Your death won't change that, won't bring him back, won't make anything better." Crow smiled sadly, the expression looking strange on his hard face. "You're a better person than me, Eva Hartwell. Better than your father, too, I think, in the ways that matter most. He would have killed me without hesitation. You don't know what he would have done. You never really knew him. Actually, I do know, because 10 years ago I gave him the same choice I'm giving you now." Eva's head snapped up, her eyes sharp and focused. "What do you mean?" "The day before I killed him, the day we talked by the fire, I told him I'd found silver on his land, told him I wanted to mine it. He refused my partnership offer, so I gave him a choice, clear and simple: sell me the land for a fair price or partner with me for half the profits, or I'd take it by force. He chose none of the above, told me to get off his property and never come back." "And you shot him for that, for saying no?" "No. I shot him because the next morning before dawn he rode into town and filed an official claim with the territorial office, making that land legally and permanently his in perpetuity. He knew exactly what I was planning, knew I would try to take it, and he outmaneuvered me with paperwork and law." Crow's laugh was bitter as poison. "So I outmaneuvered him right back, with a rifle, from 300 yards, with a single bullet that ended everything." Eva's hands tightened on her coffee cup hard enough to make her knuckles white. "You're telling me my father knew you were going to try to kill him? I'm telling you he knew the risk and chose principle over survival, chose law over compromise, chose what was right over what was safe. That's the kind of man he was. Stubborn, honorable, foolish enough to believe that right makes might." Crow met her eyes across the fire. "And you're just like him, which is why you won't kill me even though you should, even though it would be easier, even though part of you wants to." Eva stood abruptly, her jaw tight. "Go to sleep, Crow. I'm done talking, done listening to you try to justify what you did." But sleep was a long time coming that night. Eva sat by the fire, the sharps across her knees, and thought about her father, about the choices he had made and the price he had paid for them, about the legacy he had left her written in gunpowder and blood and stubborn principle. She thought about Rose safe now with Doc and Toby riding toward Redemption Creek and home and a future that might be better than the past. Her daughter had seen terrible things, had been afraid, had been in danger. But she had also been brave, had kept her head, had survived. What lessons would Rose take from all this? What kind of woman would she become? Would she grow up hard, or would she grow up strong? There was a difference, and Eva prayed her daughter would learn it. And she thought about herself, about the woman she had been a week ago, and the woman she was now. She had dug up her father's grave, had shot 9 men, wounding them all, killing none, had tracked killers through wilderness and faced them in darkness, had become for a time exactly what she swore she would never be. But she had also saved her daughter, had chosen not to kill when killing would have been easier and safer, had held to some small piece of the person she wanted to be, even when the world demanded she become something else. The question that haunted her as the fire burned low was simple and terrible. Which version of Eva Hartwell would walk out of these mountains when all was said and done? The widow who wanted peace, the farmer who wanted simple things, or something else entirely? Something new. The second day was harder than the first. The temperature dropped as clouds moved in from the north, heavy and gray and pregnant with the promise of early snow. Eva woke stiff and cold, her shoulder aching where a bullet had grazed it during the battle, her hands raw from climbing rocks, her body protesting every movement. She forced herself to eat, to drink, to move. Exhaustion pulled at her like deep water, like drowning, but she could not afford to sink. Not yet. Not for 6 more days. The prisoners were restless too. They could smell the coming storm the way animals can, and they knew that being tied to trees in a blizzard meant death slow and cold and certain. The big man with the scarred eyebrow tried to negotiate as Eva made her rounds. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carefully respectful, "we need shelter if that storm hits. Real shelter, not just trees. There's a lean-to over there, still has most of its roof. You'll fit if you're friendly about it. All of us, in that small space. Would you rather freeze separately or survive together? Your choice. Choose wisely." He had no answer to that logic. Eva spent the day preparing for the storm with systematic thoroughness. She gathered firewood enough to last through a 3-day blizzard if necessary. She moved supplies into the largest cabin, the one with the fewest holes in the roof and walls. She checked and rechecked her weapons, her ammunition, her escape routes. If the storm came and things went wrong, if the prisoners tried something during the chaos, she wanted options. She wanted to be ready. As afternoon faded to evening, the first snowflakes began to fall, large lazy flakes that drifted down like ash from a distant fire. Within an hour it was a proper snow, thick and steady and relentless. The world disappeared into white, all landmarks erased, all distances meaningless. Eva moved the prisoners into the lean-to as promised, checking their bonds one final time before the storm made movement impossible. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but they would survive if they stayed calm. She tied them in a configuration that allowed some movement, some comfort, but prevented any possibility of coordination or escape. Then she retreated to the cabin, barred the door with a heavy timber, and tried to rest. The storm lasted 2 days. Eva drifted in and out of sleep, never fully awake, never fully unconscious, always aware of the wind howling outside and the cold creeping in through every crack. She fed the fire when it needed feeding. She ate when she remembered to eat. She checked on the prisoners twice a day, making sure none had frozen or worked themselves free, making sure they stayed alive long enough to stand trial. They were miserable, but alive, and that would have to be enough. On the 3rd day, the storm broke. Eva woke to silence and sunlight streaming through the gaps in the cabin walls bright enough to hurt her eyes. She stepped outside into a world transformed beyond recognition. Snow blanketed everything, pure and unmarked and beautiful in a way that made her throat tight. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, but it was clean and clear and sharp. She walked to the lean-to and counted bodies. 5, all accounted for, all still breathing. She untied them and let them move around, stamp feeling back into their feet, curse the cold in voices rough from disuse and fear, and the certain knowledge of how close they had come to dying. Silas Crow was the last to emerge. His face was gray as old paper, his lips blue with cold. The wound in his shoulder had bled through the bandage during the night, fresh blood staining the dirty fabric. He needed proper medical attention soon, very soon, or infection would kill him before the rope could. But he was alive, still alive. "How you holding up?" Eva asked, surprised to find she actually cared about the answer. "Been better. Been a whole lot worse, too." He looked at the snow-covered landscape with eyes that seemed to see something else. "How long until your people come back?" 2 more days, maybe 3 if the snow slowed them down." "I might not last that long. Shoulder's bad." "Getting worse." "Then you better try harder. You better want to live." Crow laughed weakly, the sound turning into a cough. "You're a hard woman after all, Eva Hartwell. Harder than you want to admit." "I'm a tired woman who wants to go home to her daughter. There's a difference." That afternoon, as Eva was melting snow for drinking water in a battered pot over the fire, she heard the sound that changed everything. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders moving fast, coming from the direction of Redemption Creek. Her hand went to the sharps as she stepped out of the cabin, her heart hammering, her mind racing through possibilities. Had something happened to Rose? To the wagons? Or was this something else entirely? 6 riders crested the ridge and came down into the valley at a canter, their horses kicking up sprays of snow. For a moment Eva's heart seized with fear, thinking Crow's gang had reinforcements, thinking the fight was starting all over again. But then she recognized the lead rider, Sheriff Augustus McAllister, still pale but sitting tall in the saddle, somehow recovered enough to ride. Behind him, Toby and Doc, looking exhausted but triumphant, and 3 men Eva did not know wearing federal badges that caught the sunlight. U.S. Marshals. The law had arrived in force. The next hours were organized chaos. The marshals took custody of the prisoners with efficient professionalism, documenting each one, cataloging their crimes, making everything official and legal and binding. Sheriff Gus dismounted carefully and embraced Eva with gentle strength, mindful of her injuries. "Your daughter is safe in town," he said, and those words were like water in a desert, like air after drowning. "Staying with the banker's wife in the big house. She's been asking for you every single hour, asking when Mama's coming home." Eva felt something in her chest unclench, something she had been holding tight for days, finally releasing. "Thank you, Gus. Thank you for coming." "Thank you, Eva. You did the impossible here. 9 armed men in pitch darkness from 600 yards with a rifle you hadn't fired in 10 years. It's already becoming legend. They're already telling stories in the saloons. They're calling you the widow's justice." "I don't want legend. I don't want stories. I want my daughter and my farm, and to never touch this rifle again." Gus looked at the sharps in her hands, still loaded, still ready. "Think you'll be able to keep that promise this time?" "I kept it for 10 years before. I can keep it again." "Things are different now. You're different now. The territory needs people like you." Eva did not answer because she did not have an answer. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The ride back to Redemption Creek took 3 days through country still blanketed in snow. Eva rode in silence, wrapped in her own thoughts, her mind 1,000 miles away. The prisoners were shackled to pack horses under heavy guard by the federal marshals. Silas Crow rode near the front, his wound cleaned and properly bandaged by Doc, his hands bound but his expression thoughtful, distant as if he were already somewhere else. On the second night, as they camped beside a frozen stream that reflected stars like shattered glass, Crow asked permission to speak with Eva. The marshals allowed it under supervision with clear sight lines and loaded weapons. "What do you want?" Eva asked not unkindly. "To ask a question, just one." "Ask it. When you had me in your sights that night, when you could have ended everything with one shot, why did you aim for my shoulder and not my head?" Eva was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars wheel overhead, thinking about how to put into words something she barely understood herself. "Because my daughter was watching from that cabin," she said finally, "and I wanted her to see that her mother could be strong without being cruel, could be dangerous without being a killer, could choose mercy when vengeance would have been easier and safer and more final." "You think there's a real difference between those things?" "I have to believe there is. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? Otherwise, we're just animals killing each other in the dark." Crow nodded slowly, understanding or accepting, or maybe just too tired to argue. "I hope you're right, for your sake and hers." He looked up at the stars, countless and cold and indifferent. "They're going to hang me, you know. In Cheyenne, probably. Big public trial, lots of spectators, newspapers from back east. They'll want to make an example. Show that law and order are coming to the territory. You earned it, every bit of it." "I did. I know I did." He was quiet for a moment. "But before they put the rope around my neck, before they drop the trap, I want you to know something. I want you to hear it clear." "What?" "I'm sorry, truly deeply sorry, for your father, for your daughter, for making you into something you didn't want to be, for forcing you to dig up your past and become a killer again, even if you didn't kill anyone. I know it doesn't matter. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, doesn't bring anyone back, doesn't undo what I did. But it's true. It's the only true thing I have left to give." Eva studied his face in the firelight, looking for lies, for manipulation, for any sign that this was just another con, another angle. She found only exhaustion and regret, and something that looked almost like peace. "You're right," she said finally. "It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't make me forgive you or forget what you did. I know. But I believe you mean it, and that matters somehow. I don't know why it matters, but it does. Does that make it easier for you? No, but it makes you human, and that's worth something, I think." They reached Redemption Creek on a cold afternoon in late September, the mountains behind them already wearing their winter coats. The entire town turned out to greet them, lining the main street in silence that felt almost sacred. People stared as the marshals led the prisoners through to the jail. Eva saw faces she knew, the storekeeper, the blacksmith, the women from church who had prayed for Rose's safe return. They looked at her differently now, with something in their eyes that might have been awe, or might have been fear, or might have been both. She did not care what they thought. She scanned the crowd with desperate intensity until she found the one face that mattered, the only face in the world that mattered. Rose stood on the steps of the general store, holding the banker's wife's hand, wearing a clean dress someone had given her. When she saw Eva, she broke free and ran, her small legs pumping, her red hair flying behind her. Eva dismounted and caught her daughter up in her arms, swinging her around, holding her close enough to feel her heartbeat, to smell her hair, to know with absolute certainty that she was real and alive and safe. "Mama," Rose sobbed, her small body shaking. "You came back. You promised, and you came back. Always, baby, always. I will always come back to you." They stood like that for a long time, mother and daughter reunited, while the town went about its business around them, and the world kept turning, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Eventually, Sheriff Gus approached with gentle steps. "Eva," he said softly, "the marshals need a statement from you, about everything that happened, for the official record. Can it wait? Just a little while? Few hours maybe, but they're on a schedule. Need to get Crow and his men to Cheyenne for trial." Eva set Rose down, but kept hold of her hand, kept that connection, that lifeline. "All right. Where?" "My office. When you're ready, no rush." She spent 3 hours with the federal marshals recounting every detail with precision and clarity. The tracking through the wilderness, the ambush at Widow's Pass, the shooting at Devil's Backbone with darkness and distance and impossible odds, the 2 days in the storm guarding 5 prisoners alone. They wrote it all down in careful script, asked her to sign each page, treated her testimony like something precious and rare. One of them, an older man with gray mutton chops and eyes that had seen too much, looked at her with undisguised admiration that made her uncomfortable. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, "what you did is truly remarkable. 9 men wounded at extreme range in complete darkness with precision shooting that most trained military sharpshooters couldn't match on their best day. The Army could use someone with your skills. The Marshals Service could use you. Hell, the Pinkertons would pay you a fortune. The Army can't have me. Nobody can have me. I'm a farmer and a mother, and that's all I want to be, all I've ever wanted to be. Still, if you ever change your mind, if circumstances ever change, there's a place for you in federal service. A good place. Important work." Eva shook her head with finality. "Thank you kindly, but no. I've had enough of shooting and tracking and violence to last me 3 lifetimes. This rifle goes back on the wall and it stays there." But even as she said it, even as she meant it with every fiber of her being, she felt the weight of the sharps where it leaned against Gus's desk. Her father's rifle. Her rifle now. The tool that had saved her daughter's life and brought justice to a killer. Could she really never touch it again? Could she really go back to being just a farmer, just a mother, just Eva? She did not know the answer. Not yet. The trial of Silas Crow was held in Cheyenne 2 months later in November, when the first real snows had locked the high country and made travel dangerous. Eva was summoned to testify as the primary witness. She left Rose with the banker's family, people she trusted, and made the 3-day journey east with Sheriff Gus and Doc Whitmore for company and support. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, people standing in the aisles and pressing against the walls. Crow sat at the defendant's table, his shoulder healed but his face gaunt from 2 months in jail, 2 months of waiting for the rope. He was facing 15 separate charges: murder, armed robbery, kidnapping, attempted murder, assault, and a list of others that stretched on for pages. The evidence against him was overwhelming, damning, absolute. His own men had testified against him in exchange for reduced sentences, had told every detail of every crime. Eva took the stand on the second day of the trial. The prosecutor, a thin man with wire spectacles and a voice like a preacher, led her through her testimony with careful precision. She described the bank robbery in Redemption Creek, the taking of the hostages, the chase through the wilderness. She was factual, unemotional, precise as a clockwork. When it came time for cross-examination, Crow's lawyer, a young public defender who looked barely old enough to shave and was clearly overmatched, asked only one question. Just one. "Mrs. Hartwell, when you had my client in your rifle sights at a distance of 600 yards in complete darkness, why didn't you kill him?" Eva looked across the crowded courtroom at Crow. He met her eyes steadily, without fear, without hope, without anything except a kind of tired acceptance. "Because," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, "my daughter was watching from that cabin, and I wanted her to learn to see with her own eyes that justice is stronger than vengeance, that law is stronger than revenge, that we can be better than our worst instincts if we choose to be." The courtroom erupted in murmurs and whispers. The judge gavelled for silence, his face stern. The jury deliberated for exactly 40 minutes. They found Silas Crow guilty on all 15 counts. The judge sentenced him to death by hanging, to be carried out in 30 days on the morning of December 15th in the year of our Lord, 1887. As the marshals led Crow out of the courtroom in chains, he passed close to where Eva sat in the gallery. He stopped for just a moment, looked at her directly, and nodded once. A simple gesture, an acknowledgement. She nodded back, understanding passing between them without words. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was simply acknowledgement. 2 people who had been locked in a deadly dance now parting ways forever. Eva stayed in Cheyenne for the execution. She did not know why, could not have explained it if asked. But some sense of completion of witnessing the end of the story she had started kept her there. Some sense that she owed it to her father, to herself, to see this thing through to its final conclusion. The hanging was scheduled for dawn on a cold December morning. A crowd gathered in the prison yard, morbid and festive in equal measure, treating it like entertainment, like a show. Eva stood apart from them, her face hidden beneath a dark bonnet, watching in silence. Silas Crow walked to the gallows with his head high and his step steady. He refused the hood they offered, wanting to see the sky one last time, wanting to face his death with eyes open. As the executioner positioned the noose around his neck, Crow's eyes found Eva in the crowd. He mouthed two words clear and deliberate: "Thank you." Eva did not understand at first, and then she did. She had given him something in those final moments at Devil's Backbone, something precious and rare. Not mercy exactly, though there was mercy in it. Not forgiveness, though there was understanding. She had given him dignity, the chance to be a man instead of just a monster, to be human instead of just evil, to find some small piece of redemption before the darkness claimed him. The executioner pulled the lever. The trap dropped with a sound like thunder. Silas Crow fell. His neck broke cleanly, quickly, the way it was supposed to when the hangman knew his business. It was over in seconds. Eva turned and walked away, back to the hotel, back to the wagon, back to Redemption Creek, and the life that waited there, changed forever, but still her own. But the story does not end at the gallows. Stories never really end. They just change shape. Winter came to Wyoming territory with a vengeance that year, and with it came change of a different kind. Sheriff Gus McAllister, still recovering from his wounds and feeling every one of his 62 years, announced his retirement effective the first of the new year. The town council met in emergency session to choose a replacement, to find someone who could keep order in a territory that was slowly, painfully civilizing itself. To Eva's complete shock and consternation, they chose her. "No," she said flatly when the delegation arrived at her farm on a cold January morning. "Absolutely not. Find someone else." "Mrs. Hartwell," the mayor said, hat in hand, speaking with careful respect, "you've proven yourself more capable than any man in this territory, more capable than most men in any territory. The people trust you. They respect you. They need you. I'm a farmer. I have a daughter to raise. I have a life to rebuild. You can do both. We'll build you a proper house in town, something suitable. Pay you a good salary, better than most sheriffs make. Your daughter will have access to the school, to other children, to opportunities she won't have out here alone." Eva looked at Rose, who was 8 now and listening from the doorway with sharp interest. "What do you think, Rosie? It's your life, too." The girl considered seriously, her face thoughtful beyond her years. "Will you have to shoot people?" "I hope not. I'll try very hard not to." "But if you do, will you only shoot them a little bit, like you did with Mr. Crow, like you did with the bad men?" Despite everything, despite the weight of the decision, Eva smiled. "Yes, baby. Only a little bit. Only enough to stop them, never enough to kill them." Rose nodded with the gravity of a judge. "Then I think you should do it. You're good at helping people, really good, better than anyone." So Eva became sheriff of Redemption Creek. She served for 1 year, then 2, then 5. She enforced the law with the same precision and fairness she had used to track Silas Crow, methodical, impartial, uncompromising, but never cruel. She broke up bar fights and stopped cattle rustlers and mediated property disputes. She arrested thieves and frauds and men who beat their wives. And yes, sometimes when there was no other choice, she had to draw the sharps. But in 15 years of service across hundreds of arrests and dozens of dangerous situations, she never once killed a man. Never once had to. The reputation of the widow's justice preceded her, and most criminals surrendered the moment they learned Eva Hartwell was on their trail. In 1889, Wyoming became a state, the 44th star on the flag. The territorial government dissolved and new federal positions opened up across the new state. The governor himself came to Redemption Creek to offer Eva a position as U.S. Marshal, one of the first in the new state. "You'd be the first woman marshal in Wyoming," he said, excitement in his voice. "Probably the first in the entire country. You'd be making history, Mrs. Hartwell." Eva looked at Rose, now 12 years old, and growing into a fierce, intelligent young woman who read law books for fun and argued cases at the dinner table. "What do you think?" "I think Grandpa Flint would want you to do it," Rose said without hesitation, "and I think you want to do it too, even if you won't admit it. But it would mean travel, real danger, time away from you, sometimes weeks at a time. Mama, I'm not a baby anymore. I haven't been a baby for a long time. And besides, you've taught me to take care of myself. You've taught me everything that matters." Rose grinned fierce and proud. "You think I didn't learn anything watching you track those outlaws, watching you be brave when being brave was the hardest thing in the world?" So Eva accepted. She became the first female U.S. Marshal in Wyoming, and later, when the records were properly checked and verified, the first in the entire United States. She served with distinction for 28 years from 1889 to 1917. She tracked fugitives across state lines and through country that would break lesser souls. She broke up counterfeiting rings and smuggling operations and prevented range wars that could have killed hundreds. And in all that time, across hundreds of arrests and dozens of gunfights and situations where killing would have been easier and safer, she never took a life, never crossed that line, never became the thing she feared most. Her reputation grew and spread like wildfire. Newspapers called her the Widow's Justice and the Angel with the Sharps. Stories circulated, grew in the telling until it was hard to separate fact from legend. They said she could shoot a playing card from a mile away. They said she once faced down 10 armed men with nothing but her rifle and her nerve and walked away without firing a shot. They said criminals would surrender the moment they learned Eva Hartwell was on their trail because they knew she would catch them and they knew she would be fair. Rose grew up strong and smart and fierce. She went to college in Denver, studied law at a time when women weren't supposed to study law, became one of the first female attorneys in Colorado. She married a good man named James, a schoolteacher with gentle hands and a kind heart, and they had 2 children. Lily, the oldest, inherited her grandmother's red hair and her great-grandfather's eyes the color of deep water. In 1917, at the age of 56, Eva Hartwell retired from federal service with full honors and a pension that would keep her comfortable for the rest of her days. She returned to the farm outside Redemption Creek, to the land Marcus had worked, and she had defended to the house where Rose had grown up. She hung the Sharps rifle above the mantel one final time, and this time truly meant for it to stay there. But old habits die hard, and old skills don't fade easily. Once a month on the first Sunday, she would take the rifle down with reverent care. Clean it, oil it, check the action, make sure it still worked, still fired, true, still remembered what it was made for. Just in case. Always just in case. Now, in the farmhouse parlor in the winter of 1917, the fire has gone completely cold. Outside, the first gray light of true dawn is touching the eastern mountains, painting them in shades of rose and gold. Lily has listened all night, transfixed, barely moving, as her grandmother told the story of that September 30 years ago. "And that's how I became a marshal," Eva says, standing slowly and stretching muscles that protest the long night. "That's how a widow farmer became the first female U.S. Marshal in the country. Not because I wanted to, not because I sought it, but because I had to, because my daughter needed me, and that need changed everything." Lily stands as well, her young legs stiff from sitting so long. She walks to the mantel and reaches for the Sharps, then pauses, looking back at her grandmother for permission. "May I?" "You may." Lily lifts the rifle down with both hands. It is heavier than she expected, more solid, more real than any story could convey. She can see the wear on the stock, the patina on the barrel, the initials carved deep into the brass, NHEH, and below them, space waiting for LH. "Grandma," she says, "you said you shot 47 people in 28 years of service, but you never killed anyone, not even one." "That's right, not even one." How did you do that?" Eva walks to the window and looks out at the Wyoming morning, at the land that shaped her, at the mountains that witnessed everything. Practice, patience, and remembering every single day why I was shooting. Not for revenge, not for glory, not for power, but to protect, to serve, to bring people to justice instead of to death, to be better than my worst instincts, better than my anger, better than my pain. Did you ever want to kill them? The really bad ones? The ones who hurt children or killed innocent people? Yes, sometimes, often even. Eva's voice is quiet, honest, unflinching. When they'd hurt children or murdered good people, or were just so evil that the world seemed like it would be darker and colder with them in it, yes, I wanted to kill them, wanted it badly enough to taste it. But you didn't. but I didn't, because wanting to do a thing and doing it are different. And every time I was tempted, every time my finger rested on that trigger, and it would have been so easy, I thought about your mother, 8 years old, watching from that cabin in Devil's Backbone, and I asked myself, what lesson do I want to teach? What kind of person do I want her to see? Lily runs her fingers over the carved initials, feeling the depth of them, the permanence. Will you teach me to shoot like you did? Why do you want to learn? To protect people, like you did, like Great-Grandpa Flint did, to make a difference. Eva is quiet for a long moment, considering, weighing, deciding. Then she takes the rifle from Lily's hands with gentle firmness and sets it back on the mantel. Tomorrow, she says. Tomorrow morning, first thing, I'll teach you the first lesson. What's that? How to clean a rifle, how to care for it, how to respect it, how to understand what it really is. Eva's eyes, still sharp at 56, still the color of deep water, fix on her granddaughter with absolute seriousness. Because a gun is just a tool, Lily, just metal and wood and engineering. The person holding it, the heart behind the hands, that's what matters. That's everything. And before you ever fire a shot, before you ever point it at another human being, you need to understand the weight of what you're holding. Not just the physical weight in your hands, but the moral weight, the weight on your soul. And after that, after I learn to clean it, will you teach me to shoot? After that, we'll see. We'll talk. We'll decide together. Eva pauses, choosing her words with care. But remember this, and remember it always. The strongest shot isn't the one that kills. It's the one that saves. The one you choose not to take. The one where you find another way, a better way, a way that doesn't add more death to a world that already has too much of it. Eva walks to the window and looks out at the Wyoming morning in all its harsh beauty. The land stretches away, endless and unforgiving and magnificent. The same land her father loved, the same land where he died, the same land she defended for 3 decades with skill and mercy in equal measure. Your great-grandfather taught me to shoot straight, she says quietly, almost to herself. Life taught me to shoot true. And the difference between those two things, that tiny difference, is the difference between being a killer and being a protector, between vengeance and justice, between the person you are and the person you choose to become. Lily joins her grandmother at the window, standing close. What happened to the Sharps rifle after you retired? Why does it still hang there? Eva smiles, and there is warmth in it now, and peace. It's right there on the mantel waiting. For you if you need it, and prove you're ready for it. For your children after you. For as long as the Hartwell family needs it. She puts her arm around her granddaughter's shoulders, a gesture of love and legacy. But I truly hope with everything I have, that it stays on that wall gathering dust, that you never need it the way I did, that the world gets civilized enough, kind enough, just enough that women don't have to dig up their fathers' graves to save their daughters. But if we do need it, if the world doesn't get better, then you'll know what to do, because I'll have taught you, and your great-grandfather will have taught me, and the lessons will carry on from generation to generation, getting better and wiser and more merciful with each telling until they're no longer necessary, until they're just stories we tell by firelight on winter nights. They stand together in the growing dawn light, 3 generations of Hartwell women present in that moment, even though only 2 are physically there. Eva, 56, and aging, but unbowed and unbroken. Rose in Denver with her own family, but forever part of this story, forever shaped by what happened in September of 1887. And Lily, 14 and full of questions, and fire, carrying the legacy forward into an uncertain future. On the mantel, the Sharps rifle catches the morning sun. The initials carved in its stock tell a story that spans generations. N.H., who taught with patience and skill and love. E.H., who learned and then taught differently, who chose mercy over vengeance and justice over revenge. And space below, waiting for L.H., for whatever lessons she will learn, whatever choices she will make, whatever person she will choose to become. The rifle is clean, maintained with care. The ammunition is stored safely in a locked box. The legacy is intact, passed down through the generations like a sacred trust. And in a farmhouse in Wyoming in the winter of 1917, a grandmother finishes her story as the sun rises on another day in the American West, that vast and beautiful and difficult country that shaped them all for better and worse into the people they chose to become. The rifle waits on the mantel. The story ends. The legacy continues. And in the space between ending and beginning, in the quiet moment before the day truly starts, Eva Hartwell allows herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her granddaughter will never need to use that rifle. That maybe the world is getting better, slowly, painfully, but truly better. It's a hope worth holding on to. The only hope worth holding on to. The end. But also, in the way of all good stories, just the beginning.